Hello English learners and welcome to Slow Grammar. Today I want to look at a piece of bad advice, a rule that you're told about present perfect tense, which actually is not true at all. And frankly, it boggles my mind that you find this in so many textbooks and that so many teachers teach it. But we're going to look also at why some approximation of this may be true, or something along similar lines of put in similar terms is true, but it's quite different, the rule that is true. So here it is, drum roll. We use, according to this rule, we use present perfect when we want to emphasize the effect of the action. Now, that's what you get told. And in reality, sometimes, yes. Sometimes when we want to emphasize the effect of an action, we use the present perfect. But at other times, we don't. At other times, when we want to emphasize the effect of an action, we use past simple or some other past tense. And therefore, it's just not a rule. And so when we use present perfect, we're not using it because we're trying to emphasize the effect of the action. That's just not true. It's just wrong. So let's talk quickly about the fundamental rules, fundamental principles of the present perfect tense. If we're using present perfect simple, which we will stick to for the time being, then it is an action that is finished, that was finished in the past. And yet, the tense is present. It's the present perfect tense. So how does that work? Well, the reason is that the time of the action is not finished, which sounds crazy because the time of the action is obviously finished when the action finishes. Yeah, well, what it really means is the time that we enclose the action with, the time period within which, in our minds or in our words, within which that action happened is an unfinished one. For example, today, I have drank 2 cups of coffee today. Yeah, today is unfinished. And because we're giving an unfinished time as the time of the action, then we use present perfect. A rule that you can treat as golden is that we never mix present perfect with time adverbs that are finished, like last week, 2 years ago, when I was a child. So to say, I have been there 2 years ago, that would be totally wrong. There are a few more golden rules, on the other hand, which are about when you absolutely should use present perfect, and that is with indicator words, indicator adverbials, like any adverbial phrase that includes since. That means you must use present perfect, because if you think about what since means by definition, since 2020 means from 2020 until this very moment in time. So the kind of time period that we use for present perfect is automatically defined in any adverbial that starts with since. Yet is another example of where in the British English you can treat that as golden, that anything with yet will be present perfect because it means for all of history until now. Yeah. Ever as well, just a quick one on ever. Ever means all of history as well. Yeah, it just means all of history, including right up to this moment. But I will bust your bubble about ever. Ever can combine with past simple or a past tense. For example, if I'm speaking to someone who lived in France for 5 years back in the early 2000s, then when I'm talking about that period to them, that long period where they lived in France, I can say, did you ever visit Paris? Which means, did you ever visit Paris whilst you were in France, whilst you were living in France? So I want to give you some examples now, some counter examples to this emphasis on effect rule. So example number 1. Let's say that my cousin Scott visited me last month for 2 weeks. Yeah, he came, he spent some time here, then he left, right? And during that time, we painted my flat red. We painted the walls red. Then imagine that my mum is here visiting my flat today. One thing that I could say to her is, look, Mum, look at the walls. Me and Scott painted everything. Yeah? We painted it. Me and Scott painted it. Not me and Scott have painted it. Not. It wouldn't be natural. It's not what we would say as natives. And why is that? Because the action of painting the flat is, for me, obviously, naturally, and clearly enclosed by the time period where Scott was actually here. So this painting action is obviously enclosed in a finished time period and in the past. That time period where Scott was here. I can't very well paint the flat with Scott if Scott's not here. Okay, so we absolutely then naturally tend to say, me and Scott painted the flat. We don't even have to say when he was here because it's obvious enough. And in this example, hopefully you'll agree that there could hardly be any more emphasis on the effect of the action. You know, I'm saying, look at the walls, look at the walls, and then an explanation of why the walls look like this. But in spite of this, we would not, as natives, be tempted to use present perfect at all because of this emphasis, and so the decision to use present perfect has nothing to do with emphasis. It's not, the emphasis doesn't tempt us, doesn't cause us instinctively to use present perfect. Now, there is a lot of connection between effective action and present perfect versus past simple. And we're going to look at that. However, the point is that this rule that you're told, that we use it when we use it in order to emphasize the effect of an action. No. Another example is if I'm with a companion hiking in the hills. We go to Valbjörg and we trek, 10 kilometers to our hostel. And we're shattered and we sleep. And the next morning, I comment saying, God, my legs are sore. Then my companion would likely say, well, no wonder we hiked 10 kilometers. Right? We hiked, not we have hiked. We hiked. And why is that? Well, the hiking happened yesterday. And the effect of soreness, well, that takes a while to really set in and take effect. And it takes maybe a night's sleep for that effect to happen. Yeah, so if there is a latent effect, which there is with many actions, yeah, for latent effects, again, we do not use present perfect because that buffer time period, that time period where the effect of the action that I'm emphasizing didn't exist yet, that obviously separates the action from the present in time. And so the action is enclosed in a finished time period. And the buffer time is kind of the one side of that enclosure, the wall of that enclosure. And it does not matter if or how much we are trying to emphasize that effect by talking about the action. Hopefully you're realizing that I'm not bending over backwards and finding really obscure situations to give counter examples to this so-called rule, and that these are actually quite ordinary things that crop up quite a lot. So anyway, let's now look at what the actual connection is between effective action and the use of present perfect, and the real rule around this connection, the actual solid rule around this connection. And it is this: if a key effect of an action has disappeared, then you should not use present perfect tense. For example, if I spill some milk, and then I clean the milk up, and then someone comes to my house and I tell them what happened, then I cannot say I have spilt some milk. I've spilt some milk. No. It doesn't make sense anymore to say that after you've cleaned the milk up, after the effect has vanished. Because just like in the other examples, the removal of the effect, the vanishing of the effect, separates the action from the present and encloses it in a finished time period in the past. So that's something you can hang on to. So what that means then is, if you use present perfect tense, this implies that all the key effects of the action are still there, are still live. So you can kind of see then how someone might get carried away and make something up here about emphasis, and how it's implication, but it's not emphasis, as you can see in all of the counter examples. And the key thing that they're overlooking here is that with past simple, it can also be that all of the effects of the action are still live. It's just that with past simple, they don't have to be. And with present perfect, they necessarily are. But once again, this does not mean that it has anything to do with emphasis, and that the question of emphasis comes into it when you're deciding which tense to use. Hopefully, that has helped clear up some confusion. Hopefully, that has confirmed a suspicion that you've had that rule was wishy-washy.